Well, vaping remains a topic of controversy in this country, with governments increasingly taking a regulatory approach that limits access to e-cigarettes and other vaping products. The argument being that nicotine is addictive and that vaping is possibly harmful. However, a new book is challenging some of those narratives and instead makes the case for vaping as a harm reduction tool, arguing that it offers smokers an alternative that is much less harmful than cigarettes. Dr. Mark Tyndall is professor of medicine at the School of Population and Public Health, UBC, former executive director of the BC Centre for Disease Control, and former Deputy Provincial Health Officer in BC. His new book is called Vaping: Behind the Smoke and Fears. drmarktyndall.com is his website. Dr. Tyndall, great to have you with us here. Welcome to the program.
Okay, thanks, Rob.
Let's talk about what prompted you to write this book. Why is this needed right now?
Well, I've been involved in harm reduction for most of my career, and that includes more what people classically think is a harder drug, so heroin and crystal meth and cocaine and those kind of things. So I've really worked in harm reduction in action for 25 years, and when I heard about vaping back in 2012, this seemed like the classic example of a harm reduction intervention or a technology where people could still inhale nicotine without all the poisons involved in cigarettes. So I've sort of been at this for 10 or 12 years now, and finally decided to write a book about it.
We'll talk about how we got to the point then where vaping is viewed almost more of a public health menace as opposed to a public health tool. How did that narrative emerge?
Well, that's a great question, and that's what I try to explore in the book. I mean, people don't like smoking in society, so we've had 30 or 40 years of quite a social experiment of shaming people who smoke, and unfortunately, when this new technology came along, it was called e-cigarettes. So it's really nothing to do with a cigarette. There's no combustion. There's no tobacco. It's just allowing people to have nicotine. And it was kind of by public health and the media kind of just melded in with smoking. And it's just another form of smoking. And we don't want people to do this. So it was right from the beginning, it was off to a bad start as far as people's perception of what vaping was. And few people started really ask the question, well, is it a lot safer? And clearly right from the beginning, we knew that most of the toxins that cause disease were not even available in vaping. So it wasn't even plausible that it could cause lung cancer, but somehow we've developed a story that it's must be just as bad as smoking because it looks like smoking.
It's interesting. We see it probably in other aspects of harm reduction where, I think some people see it as less than ideal. We want the perfect solution. It's almost like we'd prefer abstinence, especially when it comes to smoking and nicotine, and harm reduction. In this case, a less harmful product is not that almost moralistic or perfect solution. Are we letting perfect be the enemy of the good here?
Oh, for sure. There's this idea that, if we just keep going with our current interventions, that smoking will become history. And although in Canada particularly, we've seen quite dramatic reduction in smoking, it's really been quite stagnant for the past decade or so, except for people who have turned to vaping, which has an impact on smoking. But it's also become a social equity issue. So it's not across the board that everybody smokes. So it's really focused on people who are more marginalized and people in lower socioeconomic terms. And they don't seem to have much of a voice in this. If the 20% wealthiest people in Canada were all dying of cigarettes and they had a safer way to get their nicotine, I'm sure we'd be jumping all over it. But it's because it's such a marginalized activity these days that we just tell people, well, either quit or you die. And even though we have a really good solution for them with vaping and other safer nicotine products.
Seems like almost an odd question to ask in the year 2025, but what makes smoking cigarettes so deadly, so dangerous?
Well, it's all to do with combustion, so it's nothing to do with nicotine. So people are dependent on nicotine, and they find it very helpful to them, and find it very difficult to give it up. And it is a very addictive substance, and but it's really when you burn the leaves that all these deadly chemicals are released. And without that combustion, most of those chemicals are no longer a peril to you. And so, but we know right down to the molecular level what causes lung cancer, what causes cardiovascular disease, what causes stroke. And basically, cigarettes in medicine are associated with almost every chronic disease we know, some directly causative, like lung cancer, and some diseases are almost all diseases are made worse by people who smoke. So we really know it's the combustion that causes the chemicals to be released, and that can be deadly for people.
So it's clear that if every smoker switched to vaping, that would represent a tremendous public health benefit. Is that to any extent then offset by non-smokers taking up vaping? How do we view it from that side?
Well, yeah, public health and media focused almost exclusively on teen vaping. So,
Mhm.
and clearly, there's kids that would never smoke or have never smoked that are vaping, and this really took on a life of its own. And we know that young people experiment with things, and whether it's alcohol or cannabis or unsafe sex or things that we're, in society we're quite concerned about, and we try to warn uh, kids about the risks of this. And vaping is just another thing that happened in Canada. It really peaked around 2018, and since then the fad has kind of gone away. Still,
Yeah.
kids do vape, but very few end up being chronically dependent on nicotine, and very few turn to smoking. So this was the big concern, that we'd get kids that were become dependent on nicotine, and then they turn to cigarettes, and that just hasn't happened. Smoking rates among kids are at all historic lows in Canada. Less than 1% of high school kids smoke cigarettes. So it's really gone away, which is a great public health success story. And many of the kids who are vaping now would be the same kids who would be smoking cigarettes. So in some ways, that's way better than them using cigarettes. Yeah, it's remarkable how that's happened, and clearly, I've had teenage kids. I have a 12-year-old now. I mean, I wouldn't encourage him to come home with a vape, but I know that likely he'll try it, and kids just have to know the truth. And the way the campaigns have gone with really outlandish claims about health risks from nicotine is the scare tactics for kids just hasn't really worked. They never work like that, and we just need to be honest with kids that you probably don't want to get addicted to nicotine. That we don't any psychoactive substances. We don't. We don't support them in young people, just like cannabis and alcohol and all these other things. But it will happen, and it's certainly no reason to ban these for all the smokers who could really benefit from vaping.
Yeah, and I mean, just building up what you said, I mean, it is remarkable how you think back even a quarter of a century ago, around the turn of the century, late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, you had 25-30% of teens who were smokers. I
Yeah,
remember what it was like, when I was in high school, and my peers, it was quite common. It's
yeah.
almost unheard of now. So it is interesting too, because this idea of a gateway effect, that vaping is going to lead to smoking, there's really zero evidence of that, isn't there?
Zero evidence. I mean, we have perfect evidence that it hasn't happened. So we've done the natural experiment. So really, vaping became more popular in kind of 2016 to 2018,
Mhm.
and it has. You would expect if it was a gateway that already we'd be seeing more young people smoking cigarettes, and that just hasn't happened. So we basically disproved the gateway thing, and which is great. So and nicotine for people who cannot get off it, and that's most smokers. So 80 to 90% of people who are currently smoking cigarettes will say they want to stop smoking cigarettes, but the draw of nicotine is just too great for them. And to me, it's kind of crazy. Then punishing them and saying, well, okay, you're going to die from this, when we could easily say, well, here's something that's going to be way better for you, and you can still have nicotine, and you can take time to, maybe if you want to get off nicotine eventually, great. And the other big advantage of vaping is you can dial down your nicotine. So
Right.
it's like cigarettes, it's really hard. You can try and smoke less cigarettes, but you can't really control how hard you puff on it and how much nicotine you're getting. But for vaping, you can actually dial it right down, and you can wean yourself off nicotine if that's what your intention is.
Well, is it partly the act of vaping that makes it effective? Because I think critics say, well, there are other tools. There's nicotine gum. There's even now, nicotine pouches, these kinds of products.
Right.
But what is it about vaping that makes it, in your view, an effective anti-smoking tool?
Yeah, well, like any harm reduction, we want to meet people where they're at. And right now, the kind of the pattern people are in, the kind of hand to mouth thing, the social part of smoking is you can do exactly the same thing with vaping. So I think that vaping is much closer to cigarette smoking than putting on a patch, for instance. And but I think all these other nicotine delivery systems can be very effective for people. But we know that patches, especially, are not that effective. So they're better than cold turkey, and people do have relied on using patches. But it's designed to have a very slow release of a steady state of nicotine, and that's not what people are usually desiring, which is more of a hit of nicotine when people take a cigarette, and then it dies off, and then they get another bump. And so vaping can supply that same sort of pattern of use. The pouch is probably much more effective than the patch because it's more direct, and you get more of an instant shot of nicotine from that. So I think pouches are also very very useful and important, but they're a step back from actually inhaling it like people do with cigarettes.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to vaping itself, I mean, less harmful, or in the case, I guess, compared to cigarettes, much less harmful, but that doesn't mean completely without harm. What do we know about what's being inhaled when it comes to vaping, possible health risks? I know critics say maybe they haven't been around long enough for us to really know for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable question. I mean, cigarettes have been around for over a century, and vaping's been around 10 or 15 years. But in those 10 or 15 years, we really haven't seen any signal of any lung disease that's coming from people who are vaping. So I think it's important to continue to watch for that. Breathing fresh forest air is better than vaping, putting in vape into your lungs. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But the risk compared to cigarettes is just so infinitely less. It makes no sense to continue with cigarettes. And so for people who want nicotine, though, or getting used to nicotine and have never smoked, I think there is it's not a zero risk, but it's just so much less. And if somebody asks me, what if I vape for 20 years, what's going to happen to my lungs?
Right.
I can say that I can't tell you for sure, but so far we haven't really noticed any changes. And people who have never smoked and vaped, people have had their spirometry followed and their exercise capacity, and really there's been no change. And so it remains to be seen, but I really can tell people that based on the chemicals that you're exposing yourself to, I don't have any major concerns that this is going to come back and bite you in the long term.
So, what does a smarter regulatory approach look like? Because we see governments making vaping products harder to get, making them more expensive. Now we're seeing a push to ban flavored products, balancing harm reduction and limiting access to minors. What does that need to look like, do you think?
Well, I think regulation is important. We want quality products. So there's been a lot of focus on kind of bizarre products coming in that you can find vape products that are unregulated that do release heavy metals and different things. So we need to make sure that what we're selling to people are high quality and don't contain these other contaminants, that the e-liquids are contain what they say they contain and don't contain extra additives and things. So all that is part of the regulatory process. But at the base, we have to make sure that vaping is much more accessible and cheaper than cigarettes. So right now, we have the taxes on vaping products are higher than cigarettes, and so we need to incentivize people who are buying cigarettes to change, and that can come easily with regulations, making them very cheap or cheaper, and reducing the taxes on them, and making them more available. So just clumping them in with cigarettes and putting them behind closed doors and things doesn't make any sense to me. And they should always be more available and accessible and attractive than cigarettes. And I think if we, as a public health strategy, I think in a couple of years we could basically change all smokers into vapors if we made them cheap and accessible over cigarettes. And we get rid of cigarettes would be a huge thing. The other thing is flavors, and that's again focused on kids, and that we don't want to have attractive flavors for children. And again, the media often focuses on kind of bizarro flavors like gummy bears and strawberry shortcake. These are not popular at all. I guess they're available. They have been sold, but what kids like flavors, just like adults like flavors. But the most popular ones are fruit flavors and mint and things like that. And the vaping is synonymous with flavors. So banning flavors is like banning vaping. So if 85% of people vaping are using flavors, they're not going to all just jump onto tobacco flavored vape. And the bizarre thing about that too is people are trying to get away from cigarettes. So having the only available vape tobacco flavor is so counterintuitive. It makes absolutely no sense to me. So we need to hold on to flavors to make them attractive to people and that people can enjoy it. And again, the moralistic part of things, I think many people, well, why should people enjoy vaping? Like, why shouldn't we make it like torturous for them and make it as least comfortable as possible? And I don't think so. If you're going to vape, you might as well have flavors that you enjoy and, make it a pleasurable experience for yourself.
So that involves convincing public officials, policymakers, but what about those in the field of public health? Your peers, your colleagues, is it also about convincing them?
Yeah, I mean, my book is directed at them. I mean, I'm fairly critical of the approach that many physicians have taken. For the life of me, I can't understand how a respirologist who basically their practice revolves around people who smoke cigarettes would not feel obligated to offer their patients a safer product. And that isn't happening. Or you go to an oncologist for your lung cancer and you smoke and they don't offer you vaping. I mean, to me, it's unethical, and it's just not part of good medical practice where we should be trying to supply people with the best options for themselves. And so I think my medical colleagues have sort of followed basically the public health messaging. And for many people I talk to, my colleagues, they haven't really looked into it. They have the same level of knowledge about vaping as a general public do, and they get their information from media. And they when they think about it, it's pretty hard for them to push back on my arguments. But for many of them, they haven't really considered it. It must be bad. Looks like smoking. I don't want to recommend it to people. We haven't followed them for 30 years, so I'm not sure about it. Very vague and unscientific kind of responses that I get from people. And I really do think that maybe I can have a role to try to convince the people that harm reduction works, that getting rid of nicotine from our society is not ever going to happen, and that we need to offer people a safer alternative.
Indeed. Well, the book is out now. It's called Vaping, Behind the Smoke and Fears. Dr. Mark Tyndall, thanks again for your insight on all of this. Appreciate you joining us here today.
Thank you very much, Rob.